Most people think unforgettable logos are designed. They're not. They're conditioned. And that distinction changes everything, because some of the most recognizable logos on Earth are objectively not that impressive. At least not at first. The strange part is the more often humans see something, the more they start to trust it, prefer it, even find it attractive. And businesses accidentally exploit this psychological glitch constantly. So in this video, I want to show you the hidden psychology behind logos people never forget. Not from a design perspective, from a human behavior perspective. Because once you understand this, you stop asking what logo looks best and start asking what survives repeated exposure. But before we get into logos, you need to understand a bizarre experiment from the 1960s. A psychologist called Robert discovered something strange. The more people were exposed to something, the more positively they felt towards it, even when they didn't consciously remember seeing it before. Words, shapes, faces, symbols. Repeated exposure increased preference. No logic, no reasoning, just familiarity. This became known as the mere exposure effect. And honestly, it explains branding better than most branding books. Because businesses assume customers rationally choose brands, but they don't. Humans drift towards familiarity. That's why people defend brands emotionally. That's why people buy the same coffee every morning. That's why some ugly logos become iconic. And this is where businesses get branding completely wrong. They think good design creates recognition, but often recognition creates perceived good design. Very different directions. At first, that sounds ridiculous, because we want to believe we objectively judge brands. But humans are unbelievably biased towards familiarity. The brain treats familiar things as safer. Which means a mediocre logo seen 10,000 times can outperform a brilliant logo nobody remembers. That's uncomfortable for designers. But psychologically, it's true. Just think about McDonald's. If you remove all cultural meaning, the golden arches are absurdly simple, almost childish. But repetition turned them into emotional infrastructure. You don't just see the logo anymore. You feel comfort, predictability, nostalgia, routine, childhood, convenience. That's not visual identity anymore. That's emotional conditioning. And what nobody talks about is most branding conversations happen at the wrong stage. People judge logos in isolation, on Behance or Dribbble, in presentation decks. But customers experience logos through repetition over years. Completely different environment. That completely changed how I think about branding. Because suddenly, the question stopped being, is this logo immediately impressive? And what wows clients? And became, what happens after somebody sees this 500 times? And weirdly, the logo that survives repetition best usually aren't the most complicated. Because repetition amplifies flaws. Overly detailed logos become exhausting. Trendy logos become dated. Clever logos lose that novelty, but simple, symbolic logos become stronger over time. That's why symbols matter so much. The human brain stores symbols differently than language. Words require processing and symbols bypass that. A swoosh, a target, an apple. The brain retrieves symbols incredibly fast, which is why iconic brands eventually stop feeling like logos and start feeling like mental shortcuts. This is also why modern startup brands feel so weak right now. Everything is optimized for immediate aesthetic approval. Minimal sans serifs, soft gradients, generic icons. They look fine once, but repetition exposes how interchangeable they are. And this gets worse with AI, because AI can generate attractive branding instantly, which means aesthetic quality is becoming abundant, cheap, fast, infinite. So the brands that survive won't necessarily be the prettiest. They'll be the most psychologically sticky. That's a completely different game. And honestly, that's actually why I started putting together these daily branding breakdowns. Because once you start understanding logos through psychology instead of decoration, you genuinely can't unsee this stuff anymore. So if you want deeper insights into branding, logo psychology, and visual recognition, click the link in the description. I've been sharing 30 days of professional logo design and branding tips just there. Now, here's where this gets really interesting. The mere exposure effect doesn't just explain recognition. It explains why rebrands fail so often, because businesses underestimate how emotionally attached people become to familiar symbols, even objectively bad ones. Humans hate losing visual anchors. That's why people react emotionally when brands simplify their logo, or modernize too aggressively, or remove iconic elements. The business thinks we improved the logo, but customers feel you removed something familiar. And familiarity is emotionally powerful, sometimes irrationally powerful. This is why branding isn't really about logos, it's about mental territory. The strongest brands occupy space in memory so consistently, they become culturally automatic. You don't think about Nike, you just recognize it instantly. That's the goal for your business. So if you're building a business, here's the real question you should ask about your branding. Not, do people like this? You should ask, could this become psychologically familiar over time? Because branding isn't a first impressions game. It's a repetition game, and honestly, this is the exact issue I ended up solving with clients constantly. Usually the business itself is good, the product is good, the service is good, but the branding lacks distinctive psychological anchors. It doesn't create memory pathways, it doesn't create recognition structures, it just visually blends into its category. So if your business is struggling to stand out, feel recognizable, or create stronger visual positioning, there's a link in the description if you want to work with me on a new logo or brand identity. I think this is why simple brands survive longer, not because simplicity looks modern, but because simplicity survives repetition. Complicated brands fatigue the brain. Simple brands integrate into it. And once a symbol embeds deeply enough into culture, it stops feeling designed at all. It starts feeling inevitable. That's the real power of branding. Not visual beauty, psychological permanence. Because people don't choose what they objectively like most. They choose what feels most familiar. And familiarity is one of the strongest forces in human behavior. If your brand isn't becoming mentally automatic, it's slowly disappearing. And honestly, if this idea about familiarity and branding changed how you think about logos, you should watch my video, Why Smart Businesses Still Choose Bad Logos. Because that video goes deeper into why intelligent founders consistently choose branding emotionally, while believing they're being rational.